This is Made for More Living with Johnny Jennings, powered by eXp Realty. Online at madeformoreliving.com.
Everybody talks about real estate and how it is a great investment strategy. And most people, when they're talking about real estate, they're referring to residential real estate. You hear about all the millionaires and stuff that were made through real estate. But today on the show, we have a special guest. His name is Paul Frank. And Paul is with PDF Group of Companies. He's the president and CEO. And Paul Frank, how did you begin? How did you get started in commercial real estate?
Boy, that is a long story. It was actually pretty much from birth. I was born at South Lake Tahoe. My dad was a pit boss, and my mom was a cocktail waitress at Harvey's up at South Lake.
Match made in heaven.
Yeah. And my dad realized that the gambling industry wasn't a place that he wanted to raise a family, so he started dabbling in real estate. And I was blessed to have a father that dressed me up in a little suit and tie from an absurdly young age and took me literally everywhere. So from 5 years old on, I went everywhere with him. You
don't strike me as a suit and tie type.
That's probably why I don't do that anymore.
Really? Yeah, I've never seen you dressed in, like, fanciest I've seen you is a polo.
Yeah, you used to dress, but yeah, not so much anymore.
So in the mid-2000s, there was a correction coming, and were you in commercial real estate at that time? Like, did you ride that wave? What happened there?
Yeah, absolutely. I was, coming into 2006, 7, had run through several developments as commercial developer. It was interesting because I did one office project. It was probably a, $20, $25 million project, and the financial package that I submitted was probably a foot thick. And then the second project was maybe $40 million project, and it was about 2 inches thick, and the bank was saying, hey, what's next? And it made me uncomfortable at that time, and I couldn't figure out what people were doing. And then all of a sudden, brokers would say, hey, come look at this project. It's a no-brainer. I would go out and not even pull my calculator out because the numbers didn't work. Next thing I knew, somebody else, another developer, would buy it and start processing a project. And I went through what I would consider a identity crisis because I didn't understand the game anymore. It was a trying time.
So you were like, hey, these numbers that you're giving me don't make sense to move forward with this project, but then somebody else would buy the project, and you're like, what am I missing here?
Yeah. And going back to my dad, I was 7 years old. The beauty and the pain of the time that I spent with my dad was that it was during some very difficult economic times. I remember my dad having 18, 19, 20% interest rate loans, and I remember the mental and physical toll that it took on him. Ultimately, he died at 60 years old, so it was a heavy toll. But I left this meeting with him, and I remember it was like yesterday. I was 7 years old, south side of Golden Gate Park. Meeting didn't go well. My dad was 6'5", 265. He's holding my little hand, and he looks down at me, and he says, never do a deal for the sake of doing a deal. It's like, who says that to a 7-year-old? Yeah. So fast forward to 2006, these people are telling me to do these deals. The bank will give me any amount of money that I want to do a deal. And I remembered my dad telling the 7-year-old version of me, never do a deal just for the sake of doing a deal, which is what kept me, on the sidelines and not in the game, thank goodness.
But you staying on the sidelines, that ended up being a good thing.
Yeah, so I couldn't figure out what everybody was doing. It was mentally, it was like if you were a dentist and all of a sudden nobody had teeth. The only thing I knew was the development game, and the rules had changed so much that I didn't understand it anymore. So I took the LSAT. I was going to go to law school, didn't necessarily want to practice law, but I didn't know what else to do. And then
that's a common thing. You don't know what to do. I'm going to go to law school. That's what most people think. Yeah.
So all of a sudden, because I'd been in this game for a long time, built a lot of relationships, and I started getting some calls from banks that needed some help. And this was before anybody knew that this 2007-8 thing was coming. So they brought me in, and as they put it, most of the developers were toxic, and most of the commercial brokers only knew how to put a sign in the ground and fill out some paperwork. So I was the fixer, if you will. So they gave me a pile of projects to analyze because they didn't know what to do with them. And the first 5 that I went out to were actually projects that I had passed on in the years prior to that, which was this epiphany moment that I wasn't quite as stupid as I thought I was, and all of this self-questioning was maybe not necessarily correct.
So you didn't have to go to law school after all?
No. So took the LSAT, but never enrolled.
So when the banks are coming to you asking questions and trying to get you to help them, how does that process work? How do you help the banks fix these projects?
Well, I did pre-foreclosure analysis first, which was, hey, we're looking at bringing this thing back. What do you think? What's our exit strategy? Are there any landmines on it? So it was interesting because I would take a look at, the source of where the chronology and history of these deals, which was fascinating. And I would basically give a nod that, yeah, this makes sense to take back. And then we would handle the stabilization and disposition on the brokerage side. Some of them were quite a bit more complicated than others, but they were all interesting for sure.
Interesting. So when you say take them back, basically foreclose on is what's happening?
Correct. Yeah.
And so how does the bank, if they foreclose on a project that's in development still, how does that work on the bank side? Great case study was a subdivision here in the region that in this case, they foreclosed on it without my knowledge and had assigned a brokerage to it that was trying to sell it, I think, for $4 or $5 million. And this is a great example of kind of a breadth of our experience and network and how we leveraged it. But we went out there and met with the suits for this national bank and walked the property. And I brought my civil engineering contractor and my civil engineer because they're buddies, and we went and had lunch afterward. And we're walking this property. We get up to the top of it, and we asked the suits, hey, do you have a notice of violation on this from the Army Corps of Engineers? And they said, no, there's no problem. And we're like, yeah, there's some issues here. So about 2 months later, they found all of the notices in an office in North Carolina, which ultimately, I think the fine was about 85 million in fines that had accumulated because of these transgressions on the previous owner's part that was developing it. So that was a worst case. That took me about 9 years to work them through and get out of it. And some of them were, obviously much simpler. Crazy, 9 years.
Yeah. What's
the typical, first off, is there a typical transaction length? And if there is, what would you say it is for a commercial deal?
No typical. Okay. I mean, it can be I guess the key is, and the biggest differentiator for those that are not familiar with commercial real estate, is the financing process and the appraisal process. That, in fact, I do classes on commercial finance and development underwriting just to kind of give new investors exposure to that. Because if you go and buy a duplex or a fourplex, it is based on your financial ability to service that debt, where in the commercial space, it's all about the property and underwriting the performance of the property that allows the bank to do that loan. Regardless of what your financial statement looks like, that property needs to perform. So that part of it, the underwriting, the appraisal process, is really a driver in the timeline for these deals.
Got it. And then if somebody wants to reach out to you about learning more about investing in commercial, what's the best way for them to contact you? They
can directly email me at Paul, Paul, at PDF, like the Adobe file, -USA.com. So Paul at PDF-USA.com.
Wonderful. And if you forget about that email and you're like, I'm not getting hearing back, go ahead and reach out to me as well. You just, Google us and we'll get you connected to Paul. Paul's one of the guys that we work with most closely on the commercial side. When we come back after this, we're going to talk about the difference between residential real estate and commercial, because I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a lot of people wanting to get into that space and they just don't know how to do it. Back after this.
Never going to happen. Too complicated. That's what a real estate agent, Mike, told Matthew, who wanted to sell his home. And so he was bummed. He was discouraged that he couldn't sell his home until he called up our good friend Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team. And Johnny said, hey, don't be discouraged. I can sell any home. And that's exactly what he did. He sold Matthew's home in record time and for full price.
See, that's what happens when you work with the professionals. Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team. They think outside of the box. They can help you get to where you need to be. And so if you're curious what kind of offers you can get on your home, the high end, the low end, maybe you just want a cash offer so you can just be done and be like, I just need to move on. Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team can help you. You can reach out at 855-TOM-DAVES, or you can always go online to tomdaves.com. That's Tom, DAVES.com. And Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves real estate team is going to take care of you. License number 581837.